Welcome to CANUARY. Now this week we are going to be doing a preserving duel. I'm going to take two canning methods, I'm going to put them head to head, and I'm going to decide which method I like best. So come along. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue at Kowalski Mountain and welcome back to our channel. Yes, this week in our CANUARY series, we're doing a preserving duel. Now this video is a part of my CANUARY Collaboration. And if you look in the description box below, you're going to see a group of YouTube collaborators and we're all celebrating CANUARY together. Now just so you know, CANUARY is a pretty popular hashtag, and you're going to find other collaborations on YouTube. Now, while we greatly appreciate you watching our videos, this video is not associated with any giveaways. Now, if you've been following me for any amount of time, you're going to know that I'm pretty straight-laced when it comes to my home canning. I want to ensure that the food I preserve for our family is safe to eat. And for that reason, I stick to the guidelines of the USDA pretty closely. My favorite canning book is The Complete Guide to Home Canning, which I purchased, but you can also get it as a free download, which I'll link in the description box below. Now in today's preserving duel, I'm going to be canning some dried beans. Beans are something that I use frequently on the homestead. Mostly kidney beans and black beans. And if you price out the difference between buying dried beans versus canned beans, you're going to find that it's quite a savings to buy the beans in the dried form. By canning the beans, we will create shelf-stable beans that are ready for use whenever we need them. Now the two methods that I'm going to put head to head in this preserving duel is the USDA method, which includes cooking and soaking the beans prior to canning. And then I'm also going to be doing a Rebel canning method, which is a dry canning method. And that's where we put the dry beans directly in the jar, we add some water, and we process both in the pressure canner. Now dry canning sounds amazing and so much easier, and so many people do it. So I feel really confident that I can create a shelf-stable, safe food for my family to eat. Now with any canning project, as a home cook, you need to evaluate for yourself your comfort level on the methods that you choose. So my pressure canner is going to hold 7 quarts of beans, and I am going to do half of them using the USDA method and half using the dry canning method. Before you can beans using either method, you need to wash your beans, which I've already done. I cleaned these in clean water. I ran it through several times to make sure that I could get them as clean as I could. And I also picked through and found any irregular beans. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 3 of the jars as the Rebel canning jars. And I'm going to go ahead and measure out these beans now. Since I'm doing quart jars, I am going to use a cup of beans and add them to my jar. Now for the time being, I'm just going to set these jars to the side. I don't want to pre-soak them because that would not follow the Rebel canning method of dry canning. So for now, we're just going to put some beans in here and put these to the side. Now for the rest of the beans, I'm going to go ahead and cook them in the hot water. So first I need to bring some water up to boiling, and then I'm going to add the beans and we'll boil them for 2 minutes. Now once those have come to a boil and they've boiled appropriately, they're going to soak for about an hour. Now with the USDA method of canning beans, there are 2 soak methods. The first is you can soak them for 12 to 18 hours. With the second method, you can do a quick hydration method, by putting them into boiling water and boiling them for 2 minutes and then allowing them to soak for 1 hour. And that's the method I'm going to use today. So we'll let this water come to a boil and I'm going to add my beans. Now, according to my instructions, I needed to boil 3 cups of water for every cup of beans. Now, I did not measure the water, so I'm going to estimate that. So what I have done is I went ahead and I put in about 5 cups of beans, which is more beans than I probably need just based on how much I put in the other jars. But I want there to be enough, so I went ahead and did that. Now these are going to boil for 2 minutes and then they're going to soak for 1 hour. Now once the soak is completed, we're going to drain them out, put in fresh water, and we're going to cook them for 30 minutes. Now the beans have finished soaking, and they did soak more than 1 hour. I had things here going on the farm, so they've been soaking for more than that. But now I have filled the pot up with fresh, clean water, and now we're going to cook it for 30 minutes. Now the beans have finished cooking, so now it's time to go ahead and get them in the jars. Now we're going to go ahead and start with the beans that we cooked. So these beans are fully hydrated, so they're going to fill up that jar all the way. Now we're going to use our bubble tool and we're going to get any bubbles out of there. And then we'll adjust our headspace as needed. Now salt is completely optional, but I am going to add salt to my beans. So for quart jars, we're going to put in 1 teaspoon of salt. And then I have a paper towel that is moistened with white vinegar. I'm going to clean my rim. Now since I am doing a Preservation Duel, I want to be sure to differentiate the 2 kinds of beans. So with the pre-cooked beans, I'm going to use the Harvest Guard lids, and with the beans that I'm doing dry canning with, I'm going to use regular lids. Now if you're not familiar with Harvest Guard lids, these are a plastic lid. They come with a separate gasket, and they do require a little bit of TLC. I have a blog post on my blog all about the differences between metal one-use canning lids and reusable canning lids, and you can find that in the description box. And I also have a video on how to use these Harvest Guard lids, which you can find right up here. So we're going to go ahead and put on our gasket. We center up our lid. And one of the most important things is we don't want to over tighten our ring. So I'm going to turn that on there until my jar turns, and that is it. You don't want to over tighten. Now I didn't mention previously, but I'm going to do a 1 pint jar of each of them so that I can try them before I release the video, because I want to give you kind of a taste test of which ones I like best. So we're going to do a small jar of each just so we can try them out. Now with this pint jar, I'm going to put in 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and I'll clean that rim. Alright, so the beans following the traditional USDA method are in the canner and they're ready to be processed. Now we're going to go ahead and do the dry canning method as well. Now if you remember at the very beginning of the video, we went ahead and measured this out already. For a quart jar, we have in a cup of beans. And for my test jar, which is a pint, I did a half a cup. Now we're going to go ahead and add the salt. And I heated some water on the stove, so this is hot, and I'm going to go ahead and fill these up within 1 inch of the top. And so that I can distinguish the difference between the two, I'm going to be using my metal canning lids on my dry canned beans. Now this is sealed finger tight and this is ready to go into the canner. I have to tell you already, based on ease of processing, dry canning is winning big time. But we'll see at the end how the taste test goes. All right, the jars are all ready. They are in the canner. So we're going to get the lid on this canner and get this lit. Now once the water inside starts to boil, we're going to let this vent. You can see we've left our vent pipe open for now. We're going to let it vent for 10 minutes. Once it's finished venting, I'm going to add my weighted pressure regulator. Now this is a dial gauge pressure canner, but with a weighted pressure regulator, this will rock and it will self-regulate the pressure inside the canner, which means I don't have to sit right here and watch it. I can just kind of keep my eye on it and I listen to it, because this needs to be gently rocking, not furiously rocking. So we're going to let this come up to temperature, and once it does and it reaches pressure inside the canner, we will process these for 90 minutes. Now we have a mix of pint jars and quart jars, but we process for the longest time. So these will be processed for a full 90 minutes, and then these will cool and we will open it up and see how they came out. Now tomorrow I will do a seal check with you, and we're going to check out this Preserving Duel and see which one of these beans I like best. Now my beans are finished being processed in the pressure canner. These finished last night. I let the pressure come down, I took off the lid, and I left the jars right in the canner to cool till today. Now I did have some siphoning. Now what siphoning means is that in a canning jar we have a 3-lid system. We have the jar, we have the lid, and then we have the ring. The 3-lid system allows any air in the jar to come out between the top of the lid and the jar. When liquid comes out, that's called siphoning. It is possible that some of this is just absorbed liquid, but there was definitely siphoning in my pressure canner because I could tell when I opened it. There was liquid on top of my lids, and it was, you know, this darker color, so I know it came from the jars. Siphoning happens for a bunch of reasons. Like this jar especially has a lot of siphoning, and I'm wondering if I put too many beans in here versus the amount of liquid. I didn't, when I was trying to remove the bubbles, the beans were not moving around freely, and maybe they should have. This is my first time canning beans, so I'm learning too. Siphoning is not, like, my food is still good. If it had lost a lot of liquid, then I would say it's not. Now I'll just make a point to use these beans first. This jar is the worst. Now let's go ahead and check our seals. Now when you store your jars, you store them without the rings. Leaving the rings on can actually cause a false seal. You think it's sealed, but it's not, because that ring is holding it on. Now all of the jars that were done with in the dry canning method are sealed. Let's try the harvest guard lids. Now I think these are the ones that siphon the most. So these are the ones I'm worried about. I'm gonna have to get my husband. Oh. So that definitely was a problem. That siphoning prevented this jar from sealing. This one sealed. Now the reason that siphoning prevents the jar from sealing is because it contaminates the rim. You can't get a good seal between the glass jar and the lid, and that would happen with any lid when you have a lot of siphoning. All right, so all but one sealed, and that's definitely a siphoning issue. Now, first thing I noticed between the two methods. With the beans that I cooked prior to, I was able to fill the jars more full of beans. Now, the instructions did not tell me that there should be so much liquid, like there should be 3/4 beans and the rest liquid. You know, there was no instruction like that. So I'm wondering if I put in too many beans. With the dry canned beans, we can see right away that this is not completely full of beans. The liquid is darker than I expected, but I think that maybe I could have rinsed the beans longer. We actually are all froze up. We live here in an RV, and it is very cold right now, and I actually was using just bottled water rather than running it through the faucet. So I was a little bit conservative. I did rinse the beans through 2 cycles of water, but maybe they needed more rinsing. Now I want to go ahead and I want to measure the difference of the contents because I want to know how much beans are in my jars. So when you're using these harvest guard lids, I always use a jar opener just because I don't want to damage the seals. I want to take as good of care as I possibly can of my harvest guard lids and seals so I get the full amount of uses out of my seals. Now, oops, I'm going to stick that lid right in the bowl so I know which is which, because I'm going to take these to the sink and rinse them out. So let me go rinse these out, and I'll be right back. Now just visually, I can tell that with the dry beans, I got a lot less beans in a pint jar than I did the cooked beans. Now I have a scale, and I'm gonna tear it out. I have an extra bowl. Tear this out. So this is the one with my dry canned beans, and I got 6.8 ounces of beans in a pint jar. Now these are my cooked beans, and I got 11.7 ounces. So for my preserving duel, I want to kind of talk through the things I like and don't like about the two methods. So that is actually a negative for the dry canning. Not having near as much beans in the jar is kind of disappointing. I would have liked to have more beans, and I honestly wanted to push the limit and put in more beans than I did. I watched a lot of videos on this process, and all of them use that same formula of 1 cup of dry beans for a quart and a half a cup of dry beans for a pint. So I stuck to the guide because I didn't want to cause a problem. Obviously, I can fit a lot more beans into a jar when I cook them. So I'm going to say that is a negative on my tally for my dry cooking, is that my jars have a lot less processed beans in them, and that means when I'm cooking I might need multiple jars just for the process. Now, I intentionally did quart jars because typically kidney beans I use in chili, and I use 30 to 45 ounces of beans depending on if I'm doubling or tripling my chili recipe. So that's why I did quart jars, so I would only have to open 1 jar of beans for a recipe. Now, when it comes to ease of canning, dry canning wins 100%. It is so much easier to use the dry canning process than doing all the cooking ahead of time, and it's much more efficient with my time as well. So that is a tally of 1 for dry canning. Because of the siphoning issue that I had with the cooked beans, which it could have happened with both, but I know it happened with these, I'm going to give that a negative for the cooked bean process. Now, that was a user error, but we're doing a duel here, so I got to come up with a point system. You can see in my quart jars how much beans. The beans only come up to about here. I'm wondering if that's a more appropriate amount of beans. Maybe that would help the siphoning. I don't know. Let's taste them. Now, these are the dry canned beans, and these are cold. The texture of the beans are good. Saltiness is perfect. They taste great. When I look at the beans, they have good shape. There's a couple broke open. There's a couple split, but they look really good. These are the cooked beans. I'm going to say that the dry canned beans have a firmer texture. Now, these textures fine, but they are a little bit softer. These actually taste less salty, but there were more beans in the jar, so that might be a factor. Now, I didn't rinse these. But these also have a good texture. Like, there's not a lot split or broken. They're not mushy, but they aren't as firm. Honestly, when it comes to the taste test, neither one is rising to the top. They're both about the same. So I have to say I'm pretty torn. Based on my point value, my Rebel canning is coming out on top. And I definitely think, like the siphoning issue, I think that was a user error. I think that I put too many beans in it for the amount of liquid that was in it. So I think that was definitely an issue for me, not necessarily the method. Just based on my point system, my Rebel canning method has risen to the top of having a 2-point lead. I honestly can say that the only benefit I see of cooking the beans in advance, because it is much more labor intensive, is that I can better control the amount of beans that are in the jar. I would need to fine tune that to figure out that right mix of beans to liquid ratio. I definitely would not put in so many beans again. I would definitely do a better job with that. I know why I'm so torn. Because I told you in the beginning, I'm pretty straight-laced when it comes to my canning. And I guess it's hard for me to choose a Rebel canning method because, you know, I still want to do the very best I can for my family. But really, when it comes to texture and flavor and the jar sealing, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Now, with any Rebel canning methods, you definitely want to do your research and choose the option that's best for your family. And if you feel most comfortable, continue to follow those USDA guidelines. I do have that free PDF that's down in the description box. The dry canning method is so much more simple when it comes to the amount of time in the kitchen and the results. I don't see that there is a huge benefit to having cooked the beans. So I think Rebel canning wins today. Well, friends, thank you so much for watching this CANUARY video and this preserving duel. I hope that this will inspire you that when you are unsure about a canning method that you want to try, that you go ahead and do a duel for yourself and see which one you like best. Now, with any type of canning, you want to do your research and make sure that you're comfortable with the canning methods that you're using for your family. Now, don't forget about the CANUARY Collaboration. The links are in the description box of all the channels, and we also have the playlist so you can see all the videos in this series. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, hit that button. We'd love you to be a part of the Kowalski Mountain family. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.